Hello valued viewers, I hope you're all doing very well. It's late June 2025 and it's a great time to be alive because the F4U Corsair has just been added to DCS. We're going to do a general guide now. First of all, my apologies. I'm aware it came out 4 or 5 days ago and I'm late to the party as ever. I've had lots of family commitments and it just is what it is, so we'll do our best to catch up. The Corsair, of course, is a carrier-capable naval aircraft with foldable gull wing design, entering service 1942, equipped with the supercharged double wasp radial engine with a max horsepower of around 2,000. First of all, let's look at the loadout. We get, as standard, a whole bunch of American liveries. We get greys, we get grey blues, we get tricolour. Let me just move that into the sun. More tricolours. We get, amazingly, Japanese ones. Not sure what that's all about, but we get them. Look very nice. We've got Lucky Gallon, whatever that is. Looks awesome. We've got no markings. We've got some markings. We've got that. These appear to be different carriers or different squadrons. All looking very nice. Very much for this as we're looking at for the first time. We also get an interesting other version. So that's the 1D version. We also get the 1D Mark IV, which, to my surprise, is actually British. I was unaware that we ran these. April 1945, HMS Illustrious, Victorious, Formidable, Vengeance, Naval Air Squadron. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Next, let's do our loadouts. We have 12 stations we can equip on. Stations 1 and 12 are rockets. That is high velocity aerial rocket, 64 kilos, and the same on all stations until we get to 5, 6 and 7. 5 and 7, we can have bombs, 100, 250, 500 and 1,000 pound old style bombs, or we can have two types with 150 gallon jettisonable fuel tanks, or we can have a special rocket, the Tiny Tim rocket, a staggering more than half-ton anti-shipping rocket, big standoff unguided rocket. Then if we move into station 6 in the middle, we have the same bombs again, but we also have this, amazingly, and I assume the world's first radar guided glide bomb, the ASM N2 BAT. We also have a 175 gallon jettisonable drop tank. We can have a percentage of gun ammo here, and we are equipped with 6 50 cal guns, 3 in each wing. I should point out the gull wing design here. It was cranked at that angle there because the prop is so big that the only way to get the gear long enough to touch the ground was to have a cranked gull wing design. And essentially also allowed the front gear to not have to be as long. Next, we like to have a quick look at the graphics. So if we just do an exterior view, it's obviously a modern 2025, very high fidelity aircraft. We'll go through the whole cockpit, or most of the cockpit, but I'll just have a quick look outside first of all. So before we look inside the aircraft, let's look at control bindings that I've set up. So I press escape, I'll go to adjust controls here, make sure you select the F4U 1D. You can have axis controls or everything but axis controls. Let's start with axis controls. It's all pretty obvious stuff, but first, pitch of the aircraft. Obviously, I'll bind that to the forward and back of my control stick, and roll. The left and right of my control stick is quite a twitchy plane we found, so a lot of these controls, even if you have a really decent stick, you might want to add some curve to give you a bit of extra resolution, and you do that by clicking axis tune, and you move this guy up to whatever it is you feel you need, and I'm still very much figuring mine out. Rudder, obviously, you want to set as an axis on your twist grip or whatever it is you have. In this case, I've got some pedals that I put there. Pedals, if you have toe brakes, you'll definitely want to set your toe brakes, known as gear brake left and gear brake right. If you need to invert them, then you can go axis tune and you can invert that there. Some people need to, some people don't. Also, it's a single engine, you'll need a throttle there, so put that as your throttle lever. And finally, I like to have an axis for zoom view. It helps me zoom in and zoom out, and I'm obviously not in VR. Next, let's go to everything except axis controls, and let's just slowly work our way down. First stuff I've got set to my HOTAS. Our bat bomb will need some controls to be bound. To turn the scope on and off, I have them set on my HOTAS. I also have search mode because you'll need to switch the scope on or the radar on to search mode. Finally, you'll need to lock the bat bomb onto the target. So you'll need those 4 controls as a minimum for the bat bomb. Let's scroll down. It's of course an air-cooled radial engine. We're going to cool the cylinder heads by opening and closing the physical cowls aft the engine. And you'll do that with cowl flaps open and close. Again, I've got that on my HOTAS on my control stick. Down here, flaps, you want to put the flaps up and down sequentially. So I've put that on my usual flaps up and down button on my HOTAS. Scroll down, gun fire button, that will just fire the guns. Scroll down a bit more. We need oil cooler, open and close. You don't have to have it bound to your HOTAS, but I suggest you do because it makes it an awful lot easier, obviously. Scroll down a bit. We have rocket fire button. Rocket, bombs and guns are all on separate triggers, so that's going to fire our rockets. Scroll down. Trim, we want nose up, nose down, left and right, and that will be on my normal 4-way hat on my control stick. And you're probably going to want yaw or rudder trim as well, and I haven't got that set yet. You can ignore that, that shouldn't be there. You can ignore that, that shouldn't be there, that shouldn't be there, and that shouldn't be there. Next, we have our weapons release button, which is our bomb drop. I also like to have zoom in slow and zoom out slow. It's a nice way of zooming in and allowing the screen to be held in a zoomed position. As well as that, I've got a few keyboard commands, so let me just start punching those in. First of all, you'll definitely want to bind your kneeboard. I've bound it here to right shift and keyload to make it the same as the other aircraft. I suggest you do the same. Gear, for some reason, in this aircraft is not bound as standard. You'll want to bind that, and I've just put it as the G button on the keyboard again to make it the same as the other aircraft. Next, you want to change your mixture up and down. You don't have to have it bound, but it's a good idea to do it because it helps when doing a cold start. So I've got plus and minus for that. Next, I've got page up and page down again on my keyboard for propeller RPM. You're going to be doing a lot of that, so definitely bind that somewhere, probably on your HOTAS. I'll probably put that on my HOTAS at some point. My next control is show pilot body, not bound to standard. You will want to be able to remove the pilot body so you can see stuff. One more important one I've just been reminded, parking brake is really useful because it allows you to set the toe brakes on permanently. In fact, you will need this. So parking brake on and parking brake off, I've just bound it to P and Shift P, and that's my lot. One more thing, viewers, the guys have just reminded me, air brake. Most aircraft have an air brake. This one, strangely, doubles up. The landing gear also operate as an air brake. We have a separate option here to toggle air brake, so it may be a good idea to also bind that on your HOTAS, and I'm going to do that right now as we're speaking. Throttle on or off, and that's it, viewers, for the F4U. Next, viewers, we're going to do a cockpit familiarization. It's important to this point to say that we are not doing a full-blooded tutorial. I mean, I've had this aircraft for exactly 1 hour and 20 minutes. So what we're going over is the basics of what you really need. If you want, we can come back and do a super detailed tutorial if you want at some point. But first, let's just learn what most of the items do and what you're actually going to need. If we start with reflector sight here, allows us obviously to see where we're aiming, with a slip gauge here, which is very important to keep your aircraft centered in yaw when you're firing your rockets and guns. We have controls here for that reflector sight and for our guns and master armor. We'll come back to the functions of that. More weapons, bombs and certain types of rockets are enabled here, and we'll come back to that. Instrument panel. If we start from left to right, we've got our droppable tank selector here. If we had jettisonable fuel tanks, which we do not have on now, on the ground they will always be in attach, meaning that they cannot be accidentally dropped. Once we take off and we're operating in flight, we put them to flight lock here, which means that they can be used, but they can also be released or jettisoned. If we want to jettison them, then we can go to release here, which we can't now because we don't have them equipped. Next, we have our tachometer, which shows the speed of rotation of the propeller. Thousands of revolutions per minute there, hundreds of revolutions per minute here, and it will only operate properly once we have a certain amount of revolutions. Next, pretty much standard issue, barometric altimeter. We have large needle, hundreds of feet, small needle, thousands of feet, 1,000, 2,000, and we can adjust the pressure in inches mercury, as you can see there, and we can zero to the airfield or whatever we want to do. Next, our manifold pressure, how much air we're sucking in, pretty much in inches mercury, and we'll come back to that. Next, this light shows when we have 3 minutes of water injection left, and we'll go over that soon. We have a stall warning indicator here and a light test for it there. We have a directional gyro here, and we have the ability to cage or uncage it here, obviously for navigation. We have our speedo here showing nautical miles per hour, known as knots because of course it's a naval aircraft. Our magnetic compass here, north at the top. We have a turn rate indicator and another yaw slip indicator here. We have our VSI here, vertical speed indicator. Are we climbing or descending in that many thousands of feet per minute? Next, here we have our ADI, attitude director indicator, and that there is our horizon line. Basically shows what attitude our aircraft is at. A warning light here for our carb air temperature. We'll go over that later. Most of this stuff we'll go over it in a bit more detail in a minute, viewers. We have the ability to cage our ADI. We have a chronometer here, a very fancy chronometer here that we can use for our timings. We have our, if I move myself down, cylinder head temperature gauge here, thermometer in hundreds of degrees Celsius with an absolute maximum there. More engine stuff here. We have oil temperature in degrees Celsius, oil pressure in pounds per square inch. We have fuel pressure here, and you can see normal operating conditions shown in the markers there. We have hydraulic pressure here, thousands of psi. We have our main tank fuel gauge here in gallons. We have our battery voltage here. We have an accelerometer, historical accelerometer here, and the ability to reset it. And we have our fuel pressure. I've never understood why, but you have fuel pressure here and you have fuel pressure here. I don't know why we've got two, and this one only works when we are generating enough electricity. We have the ability to control our oil cowls, our oil coolers here, our intercooler here, and our engine cowl cooling here, and we'll come back to that. And we have the condition shown of the oil cooler and the intercooler there. Lights, various stuff that we're not going to look at now. Interior lights here, the arrestor hook, which we'll cover in detail here. Canopy controls here and to the left. Let's skip to the far left. We have the ability to fold, spread and lock our wings here. We have trimming equipment, trimming controls here and here. Have the ability to jettison stores left and right wing. We have the ability to lock our tail wheel. All of this we'll go over, so don't worry about it too much. More trimming indication and trimming equipment here. Go over this one quickly. This is the operational fuel tank that we're going to be using. If we're starting the aircraft, we'll be in reserve standpipe. Normal operation for the interior tank, we're going to have main tank. If we have droppable tanks, then we can choose which droppable tank we're operating from, or zero. We have a redundancy hydraulic handle here in case we lose hydraulic pump for some reason. We can manually pressurize the system to a certain extent. We have a throttle quadrant here, which is going to have at least 4 controls. The ability to operate the speed of our propeller and engine here. The throttle there, which will open and close the valves to allow more or less air into the engine. Our mixture based on the weight of air, how much fuel are we going to inject. And finally we have our supercharger lever condition, and we'll go over all that as well. The ability to fire our rockets here because it's on a separate trigger. Canopy operating levers here, a whole bunch of circuit breakers we're not interested in today. We have gear, which is just going to be up and down, and associated indications. The ability to charge our starboard and port 50 cal guns. We have the angle of our flaps, and we can change that with this lever here. And as I said, we're going to go through some stuff in more detail now. Oh, well, how did I forget, guys? We have, of course, our plot, because most of the time we're going to be operating over the sea. We need to know where we're going to go, so we would mark out based on dead reckoning where we are, where we think we are, and it's going to allow us to navigate back to our carrier. As far as I'm aware, it's not actually functional per se at the moment. Next phase, viewers, I think we're going to do critical controls in the cockpit. Regards general operations, the best way I can explain that. So first, let's start with our hook. Of course, we are a naval aircraft and we have an arrestor hook to catch a wire, which I hope to do for the first time later on. We'll see how that goes. And we have the operation lever here. It can be in parking, it can be down, and it can be up, and pretty obviously if we're going to land we're going to have it in down, if we're parked we're going to have it in parking, and if we're flying we're going to keep it in up. Next, I think we'll go to the wings, which from a normal cold or hot start will actually be folded, so I think I'm going to fold them. Ta-da! Hey presto. One thing I forgot to say is that if we want to remove my pilot body, as shown bound earlier, right shift and papa, or whatever you bind it to. Right, obviously we want to lower our wings, so we're going to go here. We have wings fold, or neutral, or spread out. So I'm going to go spread out, and then I want to unlock the hinge pin. Without the hinge pin locked, the wings are free to move up and down. So it's important, once the animation is finished, we then go and lock the hinge, because otherwise it will not be a very stable aircraft. And there's a warning you can hear to tell me I've forgotten to lock the hinge. Press it again. It's now locked, so it's now spread. If I'm flying, I'm going to keep it in spread, obviously. If I need to fold it, in fact we may as well show folding it. So if I want to fold it again, I'm going to unlock the hinge, fold, speed up, and then back in neutral. Next, gear, very simple. It's going to be up or down, and I'm just going to press the G button, or I can actually use the lever manually, but I'm just going to press the G button. Next is flaps. You can try and grab this lever here if you like and move it with the mouse, but you end up just using that. So instead, we're going to use the controls that we saw last time. They go down in notches of tens of degrees, all the way down like that, and then put them back up. Next, air brake. Remember, air brake is also the landing gear. The landing gear come out, they use these plates here to help slow the aircraft down. Why would you need that? Well, you may need to brake the plane, but especially you may need to brake the plane if you're in a dive, because warbirds can easily lose control due to aerodynamic compressibility, or they may damage themselves at high speed, so they need to find a way of slowing them down. So you put the gear out, but you do it in a special way. If we press the air brake button, it will just lower the front landing gear. It won't also lower the rear, which obviously don't really help in air braking. So next, back here, tail wheel lock, which is this guy here. Your tail wheel can be locked so that it doesn't swivel, or it can be unlocked so it can swivel. You will have it locked in the following conditions: if you are doing a carrier or airfield takeoff, or an airfield landing, or general flight. You'll have it unlocked if you're doing taxiing, either on a carrier or on an airfield, to give, high maneuverability on the ground. You'll also have it unlocked on a carrier landing. Finally, canopy. If you want to just roll the canopy back, press that button there. And if it's an emergency canopy release, we can press this guy here or that guy there in case you've only got one arm serviceable. Boom, and that's your canopy fully off. Next, viewers, we need to do engine control. In any early or mid-war World War II aircraft, there's a certain amount of maintaining the engine you need to do. If you don't do that, you will blow the engine up, you'll damage it, and you'll have a very bad day. So it's just a factor of life of this part of history. In terms of controls, what I'm going to do is put my controls up here. You can see I can move my throttle, which is that lever there, and it shows up as that control there. I can move my propeller and engine RPM. That does that one there. I can move my mixture. That does that one there. And finally, I can do my supercharger, which is going to be that one there. And just moving it back into position. The condition we'll have our engine in terms of controls will differ depending on what we're doing. Are we climbing? Are we diving? Are we fast? Are we slow? Are we high altitude? Are we low altitude? And so on. Sounds complex, but once you get used to it, it's pretty easy. There are 3 ways of knowing which condition you need the engine in. 1, you can just do it by memory. 2, you have a cheat plaque down here. modelled on the real aircraft. You can see if you're going that fast, you're going that high, you're going that whatever, use that condition. Or even better, which is of course the kneeboard. Right shift and kilo will bring a kneeboard up, and you can stretch it and you can do whatever you want with it. What I want to do is go that little arrow there, that little arrow there, that little arrow there, keep going until you find this. This tells us exactly how to operate our engine at any condition. So let's understand. Sea level to 5,000 feet here, above 5,000 feet, above 10,000 feet, above 15,000 feet, and above 20,000 feet. Associated with each elevation or altitude is a regime. Economy means you want to get the absolute maximum fuel economy possible, probably because you're running out of fuel and you need to get somewhere, and it doesn't matter how fast you get there. Economy cruise, you want to be as fuel efficient as you can, but you want to be at a decent speed. Rated, that is your basic power for climbing, or regime for climbing, which you'll do a lot of in a warbird. Military, 5 minutes. That's the maximum power we can get from the engine without using water injection, limited to 5 minutes because above that will damage the engine. Finally, WEP, wartime emergency power, the absolute 2,000 horsepower or whatever it is. By doing that, we will move the throttle lever to its absolute maximum position, and out of interest historically, we will snap a wire, I think it's that wire there, which will engage the water injection, which is sprayed into the inlet manifold, and then what that does is cools combustion down and means that we can get the maximum power without blowing the engine up. You're limited to about 5 minutes of water, and you must not use WEP without the water because your engine will blow up. And that green light we looked at the top says you've got 3 minutes of water remaining on WEP. Okay, so that all must be adhered to. Next, associated with what you want to do and your altitude, you've got your map, your manifold pressure measured in inches mercury, and all that means is that gauge there. So for climbing, and you're currently at 1,000 feet, do not exceed 44 on that gauge there. Simple as that. And you can have this tucked down in a small mode if you want. RPM, just like our map here, do not exceed that RPM measured by the tacho there for that condition there. And I'm aware the tacho is not working at the moment. That's just because we're on idle. We're not actually generating enough amps to actually run it. Next, the blower, which means our supercharger can be in 3 positions: neutral, low, or high. Late war aircraft, or even some mid-war aircraft, had automatic superchargers, which means they change themselves by themselves. This is a very manual aircraft. You'll need to change it yourself. Very obviously, you can see in which case you need neutral, low, or high. And if you ever need to figure out which position the lever needs to be in, then you can see it written down here: neutral, low, high. And the mixture is kind of off the side of the quadrant there. Next is our CAS. That is our anticipated speed if we're flying at that altitude, that regime, blah, 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 blah. Based on a clean aircraft, that will be different, obviously, if you're very heavily fueled or you've got exterior stores or whatever. Finally, your anticipated fuel consumption in gallons per hour of use based on that condition there. So it's super simple. Pop this up if you're doing something, match the limits you've got here or do not exceed the limits, and you will have great fun and you will almost never destroy your engine. You've also got a simple guide here for supercharger settings: 0 to 5,000 neutral, 5 to 20,000 low, above 20,000 go high. Also, these are based on straight and level flight. If, for instance, you were in a dogfight and you were turning, you would have much less cooling going through the engine if you were at low speed during a turn, which would drastically reduce the amount of time, for instance, you can use WEP and military power out. And that's something that real combat pilots would have been trained for, and it's something you'll just have to get a feel for, viewers, okay? Now that ties hand in hand with cooling, viewers. So we know what our supercharger's doing. You know how much gas you want to chuck into the engine. You know how fast you want to run your prop, and you know how open you want the valves that let the air into the engine. Well, now you know all that, we've got to actually maintain the engine, because of the last bit I said, that cheat is based on straight and level flight. Now, if you're doing something other than straight and level flight, or it's a very hot day, or, you know, a myriad of other conditions, your engine may still overheat and die. So we have to maintain our engine via our instruments. There are several instruments to use. The most important is going to be the condition of our cylinder head temperature, because this is an air-cooled aircraft. It can very easily get too hot and melt or blow up the engine. And you can see it here. Normal operation blue, absolute limit 260 degrees Celsius. If that's getting too hot, then we can do two things. One, change what we're doing. Don't fly on so much power. We also have our cowls. That guy there, which we have bound, if you remember, to the button we've got there. We can open and close it. We do not have a gauge to read it. Instead, you look out here. I'm trying to see it, and you can see them opening or closing there. In terms of when to use it, in your phase of ground run or a takeoff, you want the cowls open because they need to be cooled, because we're not going very fast. If you're in a climb or initial flight, you're going to have it locked, so partially closed, hydraulics active, so I don't know, half open, half closed. If you're doing cruise or high flight, you can have it closed because you just don't need that much cooling at that speed, and obviously the more closed it is, the more aerodynamic your aircraft is, the faster it will fly, and just the better it will fly. Slow flight, high power, let's say dogfight, you're going to want it locked or open to prevent overheating. Okay, it's all relatively simple stuff. Next, we're going to need our oil cooler to think about as well. Our oil temperature is real hard to see, viewers, and you'll probably never be able to see it. I'm going to try and get myself in a position to see it all the way down there, and down here, and down here is our oil temperature there. It may get too hot. We need to open and close the oil cowlings, which I've got here. I bound it on my stick, and you can see we have an indicator in front of it to say if it's closed or if it's open. Oil gets too hot, open the cowl, and vice versa. Finally, we have our intercooler. If I want to introduce the intercooler, what I'm doing is I'm cooling the air down as it comes out of the supercharger. So the supercharger, if engaged, sucks ambient air in, it compresses it. By compressing it, it makes it hotter, too hot for the engine, and it may need to be cooled down again before it goes into the carburetor of the engine, and we have the ability there to introduce intercooling to cool that air before it goes into the engine. Finally, viewers, overspeed. Because the prop is aerodynamic, if we put ourselves in a dive, the diving, rushing air will actually help spin the prop. If the prop spins too fast, then it can actually destroy the engine, destroy the aeroplane. So it's very important to not overspeed the prop. The way I personally do it is when I go into a dive in any warbird, I almost always go straight back to idle throttle, and that will help limit the speed of the prop. Next, viewers, probably your favourite bit, weapons. We're just going to show the basic controls so you're not flapping around trying to realise where your gun doesn't fire or something like that. First, obviously, guns. First, we need to charge the guns. As I charge the guns, Damp will explain, because he's a gun guy, what charging the guns actually does.
Because the Browning M250 caliber machine gun is an open bolt machine gun, cycling of the charging handle will cycle the first of the rounds into the open bolt chamber and allow that round to be placed in the open position, and it ready to be locked in and then pushed into the barrel of the shot.
It just needs to be once per mission you do that, right, Sock?
Yep.
Roger. Do I want my gun camera on? Not modelled, so it doesn't matter, but I'm going to turn it on to gun. Master arm. To fire any weapons, master arm on. Also, for each wing we have an outboard, a centre, and an inboard gun, and we can isolate the guns if we need to. Do we want our gun sight? Primary reflector, secondary reflector. Let's just put that in primary. And how bright do you want your sight? We have a rheostat there. Oh dear, it's not there. Why? It's because we're not generating enough electricity from the generators, so I'm going to put my wheel brakes on. I'm going to spool the engine up a bit. And hey presto, it all appears. And I can fire, obviously, by pressing the gun trigger. And there. And fire. As far as I'm aware, there is no way of knowing how much ammo you have left. Next, rockets. As we saw earlier with HFARs and with Tiny Tims, I've now got 8 HFARs on my underwing pylons. We'll just stick with HFARs for the time being. To operate HFARs, we need this panel here, which can be real difficult to get at, so just get yourself comfortable in position here. You'll only really have to set this up once. First, we need to energize the system by putting this cover up, which is really hard to do, by the way, and there we go, got it, and energize. Next, we arm the rockets. There. Next, which station is going to fire next? Station 1, and we can reset that there if we wanted, but we obviously don't want to. Next, do we want to fire a single rocket on each wing per press of the button, or do we want to fire salvo, where we press the button, hold the button, and they all come off? I want to fire single, and as we saw before, we're going to use that button there, which is actually quite hard to get on my stick, and... Next, the Tiny Tims, which are unguided rockets like the HFARs, but operate differently. So let me arm 2 of those. Unbelievably massive rockets that we can use to lob at, well, anything we like, but ships, obviously, because it's a naval aircraft at a large standoff distance with a huge warhead. We can carry 2. Note, they are on the left and right bomb pylons, so we actually operate them, strangely enough, as bombs rather than rockets. So we're not going to touch this panel down here. Instead, we're going to touch the bomb panel. Do we want the left pylon energized? Yes. The right pylon? Yes. And that's all I need to do for the rockets. Otherwise, we're going to press weapon release button. And I've decided I only want to fire 1. I have to rev the engine up just to get enough electricity to fire. Guys, did he go through the prop?
Yes, that's an animation error.
Is it supposed to go through the prop like that, or is it not?
Here's how it's supposed to go. So the Tiny Tims are supposed to be just released off of the bird. They fall for about like a foot or 2, and then there's a string that when it gets tight, it gets pulled off of the rocket, and then it ignites.
But that also explains why it's dropped as a bomb and not fired as a rocket.
Right, because you are essentially actually dropping it as a bomb. It just so happens it turns its rocket motor later on. All right, guys, thank you for that. Next is going to be the actual bombs, I guess. So I've gone for a 100-pounder, a 500-pounder, and a 1,000-pounder. Okay, guys, and it's going to be pretty easy. Do I want to arm my left bomb for drop? Yes. My right bomb for drop? Yes. My center bomb for drop? Yes. Unsure why it's called pylon release. I'm sure there's a good reason for it. Also, because they are bombs, they need to be armed in terms of fusing. So fusing, safe, they will not explode. Tail fuse, nose and tail, sorry if I can get that right, nose and tail fusing. Guys, and that's pretty much it. We press the weapons release button and all 3 should drop. How embarrassing for me. Why am I not dead? Well, I was too low to the ground and the bombs didn't have time to actually arm their fuses, which is kind of a failsafe that bombs have. In terms of actually aiming the bombs, and the same will apply to the rockets and the guns as well, we'll do it with a collaboration of using weapon aiming tables, which we don't have at the moment, but we will probably have in the future, in collaboration with our sight here. This is a stereoscopic sight. That's 0 milliradians, that's 100 milliradians, which is an angle. We can either range ourselves from the target by knowing the size of the target in feet, comparing them to the milliradian circles here, and then we'll know our range to the target. We'll also know our altitude, our speed, and our attitude. We compare those statistics to the bombing tables, and then we'll know how to approach the target, and we'll know when to release the weapons. But at the moment, it's just going to be essentially aiming by eye. Generally speaking, the steeper you'll dive on a target, the more accurate you'll be, but also the more dangerous the dive can be. Finally, viewers, everyone's favourite, of course, the radar-guided, and I'm not kidding, 1942, the radar-guided bat bomb. This thing is a real beast. Centre station only, it's absolutely massive, and it literally just hangs on there, as you can see. What happens when you arm the bat bomb? Of course, automatically you get the bat bomb radar scope shown here. First thing we're going to do is turn our radar scope on. We remember we got the buttons to turn the radar scope on. To turn it off bound, we've got search mode, which we will have to enter, and once we've found a target in search mode, we will lock, which will allow us to fire the bomb. First, we're going to turn our scope on. We're now going to turn it into search mode, and when you turn it into search mode, there'll be no discernible change. Next, we must not forget to put our master arm on for all weapons. To arm the bomb specifically, pylon release up. Also, very important, fusing, you must fuse it in the tail position. That must be done. Note here you have the raw radar return. You may, if we're lucky, see spikes when it detects the ship. We may not, because it's a very hard scope to actually see. More importantly, we have open brackets here. If the search radar finds a ship, then a circle will go in that bracket there. We'll then press the lock button until a second circle appears there. It then has a full lock on the ship, and the bomb is locked, and the bomb is ready to be fired. Now, the way to do it is to turn your reflector sight on, turn your rheostat up, find the ship visually, and aim at the ship. Now, could you do this at night? I don't actually know. The distance the radar will spot the vessel at will depend on the size, on its aspect, and on environmental conditions, obviously. And it is not a good radar. It's not an F-18 radar. It can only do, well, maximum 10 miles, but realistically, you're probably not going to be 10 miles. We need to talk about the kinematics of the weapon, and I'll try and do that. In fact, I'll do that now. The bomb is a glide bomb. It is not powered itself, and it's completely dependent on the kinematics of our aircraft as we drop the bomb. So we need to be going very fast, or as fast as we can, and dropping from as high as we can, relatively steeply, to give it a chance of reaching the target. It's not an aerodynamically efficient weapon like a modern glide bomb, so you'll only get a few miles out of it. Okay, we've found the target, the first circle. I'm going to press target lock now. Pause. 2 circles achieved. Master arm on. Final release on. Tail fuse indicated. We can now drop the bomb. Unpause. Bomb away. Now the cool thing about this is, amazingly, it's a fully guided bomb. It has its own radar and it will do all the work for me. All I had to do was give it enough kinematics to be able to get there. Why was it developed? Well, we can hit this thing a long way away without even getting within substantial AAA distance. So, you know, it is an absolute game changer. The Japanese would have thrown their face at it, and the Americans could throw this at it. And really interestingly, I actually didn't know the bat bomb existed because I'm a terrible human. Is there anyone else here that didn't know this existed until about an hour ago?
I did.
Yeah.
Brilliant, just me. I knew the Germans had the Fritz, but I did not know the Americans had this.
Yeah, I didn't know either.
Poosh.
So the Germans had the Fritz and actually a powered cruise missile.
Really?
But this one is the very first self-guided, active guided missile.
So cold start first, we need to open the main cooling cowls. So just press the button that we saw earlier and they will open without the battery turned on. Open. Next, remove our pilot because it's always in the right way. Right shift and P, that's going to be for me. Next, our throttle quadrant. We need to make sure the 4 levers are in the right position. The speed of the prop needs to be all the way that way, max speed. The supercharger all the way forward to neutral and the mixture all the way back to idle off. Next, we need to get our head in that kind of position and we're going to move our throttle lever so it covers that bit of writing there, which seems to be oddly specific. Next, we're going to turn our battery on. Next, we're going to go to our fuel tank selector. We're going to go from off left again to reserve standpipe. Reserve standpipe allows us to use all of the fuel in our interior fuel tank. Once we're airborne, we're going to change from reserve to main, which allows us to use all fuel in our interior fuel tank except for the 50 gallons of reserves. Don't forget to go back to main. Next, we're going to go over here again. We're going to go fuel pump on and we're going to prime the engine for 10 seconds on average. 0, 1, 2, 9, 10. Next, we need our magnetos on, obviously. So from off, right, left, and both. Next, parking brake. Left brake on, right brake on, and hold. Press the button we looked at earlier to engage the parking brake. Release, and parking brake is on. We're going to get our camera in a suitable position like that so we can see the start button there. We can see the tacho there. We can see the prop spinning there, and we can see the mixture lever there. We're going to press and hold the start button until the tacho gets to around 500 RPMs here, at which point we're going to move the mixture forward 1 slot to the middle position, at which point the engine should catch. Once it's fully caught, we're going to move the lever forward again, and that should be us done. Let's give it a go. So press. And there we go. One thing to note was that I let off the starter button once. I'd moved the mixture to the middle position, and now it's fully caught. I'm moving the mixture to the absolute full position. It's kind of hard to explain when I was doing that. You may have to play around with it for a few times to get it to work, but I'll just explain again. I pushed and held the start button. Once it was almost at the 5 here on the tacho, the 500 RPMs, I moved the mixture to the middle position. I then, after about half a second, I came off the starter button, and then the engine fully caught, and after that it's self-sustaining, and I moved the mixture to the max position. Next, I need to bring my RPM down using the throttle lever to 750 according to the flight manual. There, while the engine warms up to at least 40 degrees Celsius for the oil, which we can see, always hard to get to. There. While the engine's warming up, we can do the wings that we saw earlier very quickly. I'm going to speed up. And I've got to unlock there. Wings are done. And relock hinge there. We need to do our interior and exterior lights as required, and I have no requirements at the moment. We need to set our barometric altimeter as required, and we have no requirements at the moment. Finally, we need to uncage our ADI here so that it functions, or maybe we'll do that just before takeoff actually, to be honest, but let's pretend we're about to take off. And that's pretty much our startup procedure done. Welcome back, viewers. We're now doing a takeoff on an airfield, which is a little different from a CV. So first, we need to make sure our cowls are fully open, which they will be from your start anyway, but just double check. Next, your wings obviously will need to be spread. Unlock the pin, speed the game up, relock the hinge pin. Done. Next, trim. If you ever forget, it says here, rudder 6 degrees right, aileron 6 degrees right, and elevator 1 degrees nose up. So elevator, you can turn it here, or you can use the binds that you set earlier on. And aileron right 6 degrees, and rudder right 6 degrees. What that means is you can pretty much take off more or less hands off, and you're not going to have to fight the roll and the yaw quite as much. Tail wheel lock. If we're taking off from an airfield, you must lock your tail wheel by pushing that in like thus. Next, flaps. General condition for flaps is 20 degrees. If you're very heavily loaded, you may want to go more, but we're relatively heavily loaded. We've got a bat bomb here, some rockets, and full fuel. Next, you want your quadrant condition for takeoff. One way we can do this is go down here and look at our do not exceed plaque. So takeoff, we want our supercharger in neutral, forward, and it is. We want a maximum RPM of 2700, which is our maximum, so yep, that's a maximum. Next, we want our maximum manifold pressure of 53, so let's say 50 just to be safe, which we will control with our throttle. We want auto rich for our mixture, which we're not, we're lean, so let's push that forward to auto rich, and a max head temperature of 260 degrees, which I'm sure will be fine. Parking brake will be on from startup, so press. For me it's left, shift and P. For you it's whatever you bound it as. Parking brakes off, check the toe brakes work, and that's us ready to take off. I'll put my controls there. You can see my trim, you can see my stick, you can see my rudder, and you can see my throttle and engine quadrant. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to ease throttle forward up to our maximum of about 50 psi here. I'm going to maintain left and right yaw with my toe brakes, which you can't see on my cheat screen here, but they'll be here working. Once I get fast enough, probably after about 50 knots, I'll get control from my rudder, and I'll be using my rudder to control myself. Let's give that a go. So, forward we go. My stick is going to remain pretty much neutral. 50 psi. I'm drifting left, so I'm going to use my toe brake to stabilise. Start feeding in the rudder now. Drifting right now, so just stabilise that. Airborne. Gear up. Flaps up with the binds. It looks good. I'm going to pause there. Sorry about the harsh noise. At this point we want to change to our flight configuration, or should I say our climb configuration. So we can go down here. Just got to memorize this obviously. That's going to be normal for climb. So supercharger based obviously on your altitude. 2550 flat PSI depending on your altitude. Auto rich, or finally you can also press right shift and K for me anyway, or the binding for your kneeboard, and you can go and find, based on your altitude, your rated, which means your climb, PSI, RPM, supercharger condition. Welcome back, viewers. Next we're doing an airfield recovery landing. We're not doing it full Milsim procedure, we're just doing a practical landing. We're currently in the downwind leg, which means the runway lands like that there. We're about a mile offset on the left circuit. So first I want to put my seat up a bit. I could literally set up like that, or just move my seat up with right shift, right control and numpad 8. Next we're going to check our speed as long as we're below 200 knots. Where is the speedo? There it is, which we are. Gear can come down and our flaps can lower down. I'm going to go on 30 degrees, flaps down. May need more if we're heavily loaded. Next, our RPM needs adjusting, so let's just get that on the go. Bring our RPM down to 2300 or thereabouts with this lever here, or I can just use my controls. So bring it down, 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 down. There about 2350 RPM, and bring the manifold pressure down. And we're going to fly pretty much like any standard Warbird 3-point approach and landing. We've got to be extra careful in this aircraft because the engine and prop are so big and heavy that if we introduce throttle aggressively in any way, it will roll our aircraft around. So we're going to unpause. We're going to retrim ourselves constantly in terms of elevation to keep ourselves neutral in elevation. We're going to approach with a fairly steep left corkscrew to keep the runway in sight. It's just how I do my Warbird landings. Keep an eye on the speed, 120 knots now. A landing is going to be around about 100 knots, maybe slightly lower depending on weight, or slightly higher if you're heavier. Still retrimming here. Alright, 120 knots, going to come down a little bit more. Think about circling in now, so we're going to do our base turn now. 110 knots. Just resist the urge to put on the power. 105 knots. Bit more descent rate. If we need to feed on the power, then we feed it on very slowly. 110 knots. Rudder, kick it around with a rudder. Down to idle pretty much. And we're going to essentially hover above the runway in the 3-point position, 10 feet above the runway, and let it sink into the runway as it begins to stall. Angle of attack up as the speed gets lower, and she'll naturally settle in a 3-point position. That's not too bad. My second ever landing. Using my toe brakes to control our left and right at this point because the rudder isn't going to do much. And a combination of the two to bring it to a full stop. Like I said, as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty much like any other Warbird landing, and it's pretty easy. The only real danger is, as I said, putting too much power on too quickly will tend to spin it over. Hence, it's really important to go down to that lower RPM. Welcome in, loading in now on the carrier. It's a pretty similar exercise. Make sure our cowls are open, and they are. Turn our pilot off. Turn our wings down. Wrong way. That way. Hinge pin all the way down. Hinge pin up. Next, trim. Exactly the same, but this time instead of 1 degree nose up, we're going 4 degrees nose up because we're doing a minimum length takeoff. Tail wheel locked again. Quadrant, same as last time, so RPM all the way up, supercharger all the way forward, mixture all the way forward to auto rich. Flaps this time because minimum length takeoff all the way down to 50 degrees, even for a lightly armed aircraft. The procedure is going to be, it can be a little bit awkward. We're not going to use our parking brakes, we're going to put both of our turbo brakes on. We're going to throttle our engine up to around 53 inches mercury as per last time. If we wait too long on the toe brakes, the whole aircraft will tip over. So we've got to ascertain the point at which we are making the full horsepower but not hitting the deck with our prop. At that point we come off the toe brakes. We're then going to use a mixture of toe brakes and rudder to steer. We're going to get our empennage, the rear of our aircraft, in the air as quickly as we can by using a bit of forward stick, and that's it. Fly off the end. She should be generating plenty of lift by the end. So let's go. Toe brakes on, start to spool. There go. Bit of steering, bit of stick forward. Full rudder control. That should be a flying aircraft, hopefully. Whoop, 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 woo. Gear up. Flaps up. Check speed, 100 knots. Boom, that's it. At that point, you'd either go into your cruise configuration or your climb, your rating configuration. And that's it. It's pretty easy. It almost does it itself, to be honest. Right, viewers, finally, we're going to do a carrier landing. We're starting a mile away in a circuit again, about 800 feet, about 160 knots. So first, seat up, maximum visibility, please. RPM, we're going to bring that down to 2350 again, thereabouts. Gear, are we below 200 knots? Yes. Gear out. Flaps, this time all the way down to 50 degrees. We probably won't achieve 50 degrees initially because we're too fast, but by the time we get slower, they will drop to 50 degrees. Next, we need our hook down. So over here, hook down. Check the hook went down. It did. Associated with the hook, we need to make sure our tail wheel, is not locked. So it is unlocked. We're going to fly a similar diving spiral base turn like we did with the Airfield Landing. We're going to try and come in a bit flatter. We're going to have the same touchdown speed of about 90 to 95 knots. We're going to try and come in about 20 feet over the deck and try and hook one of those wires, and that's it. And all right, we need to get down on the speed, and we need to get the elevation trims neutralized. Speed coming down 130. Start turning in. 120. Lots more trim. 120 knots. 110 knots. Lots more elevation trim. A bit more power, not too much. 100 knots. Let's stabilise. Right, that big old prop's going to want to drag me off centre now, so let's just... I just realised I forgot to show my controls. Sorry, viewers. A lot to remember doing this. In we go. Start kicking in the rudder. A bit less throttle. Too high. Down a bit. Off the power a bit. And dump it. And cool. And that was actually my second attempt, was it not, guys?
That was. It was. Yeah, it was good.
I'll take that. I'll never be able to do it again. But there you go. Hook up and then go land. Viewers, that's what we've got to show with the F4U at the moment. It's awesome. It's not easy per se, but none of the warbirds are easy. If you haven't bought it, then there's something wrong with you. That's it. Anything to add from my guys that I've forgotten, of which there's probably a lot?
It's a good flying airplane, I think.
There you go. Also, don't do that. Just don't do that.